They won't even give me a permit for the parties, man. They don't want me to throw the parties no more. But we ain't gonna stop. We gonna keep on having fun, bringing people together from all walks of life. You gonna hear about my parties. They're gonna be shutting them down. They're gonna probably be arresting me.
Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony from Day 5 of the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as reported by Inner City Press. Day 5 of the trial took a sharp and unexpected turn, not because of what happened inside the courtroom, but because of what hit the internet just minutes before it began. Justin Bieber, once mentored by Diddy during his rise to global superstardom, finally broke his silence. What he shared didn't just support Cassie's testimony, it validated years of whispered rumors, disturbing footage, and awkward interviews long buried by the music industry. And when Diddy saw what Bieber had posted, first on his phone, then displayed by reporters and passed around the court, he lost it. The man who once boasted about shaping Bieber's career cracked under the weight of betrayal. Security had to step in. The courtroom fell silent. What followed wasn't just a meltdown, it was the beginning of the end. Back in 2009, Justin Bieber was the face of innocence, just 15 years old, barely out of Ontario, and newly signed by Scooter Braun and Usher. His debut single, One Time, was climbing charts, and overnight, he became a global phenomenon. He was the dream, clean-cut, charming, and already beloved by millions. But behind the cameras, Bieber's fast-tracked rise was being shaped by people much older and much more experienced in the shadows of the industry. One of those people was Sean Diddy Combs. Diddy didn't just meet Bieber, he took him under his wing. He showed him the ropes, brought him to parties, and declared himself a mentor. In one now infamous clip from the time, Diddy even joked during an interview that he had custody of Justin for 48 hours. It was delivered as humor. It was laughed off. But it planted a seed of discomfort that wouldn't fully sprout until over a decade later. Videos from that era show Bieber, wide-eyed and a little awkward, standing beside Diddy as cameras flashed. Diddy would speak for him, crack inappropriate jokes, and guide the young teen through situations that, in hindsight, felt too adult. Too soon. One clip shows Bieber trying to joke about getting girls, and Diddy replying, "My man!" A moment that seemed playful then, but is now viewed under a much darker lens. Diddy wasn't just a celebrity, he was one of the most powerful figures in the music world. For Bieber, having Diddy's stamp of approval meant access, influence, protection, but it also meant vulnerability. Being under the influence of someone whose world was filled with temptations, blurred boundaries, and unchecked power. In interviews at the time, Bieber spoke glowingly of Diddy, calling him an inspiration, someone who believed in him before the rest of the industry took him seriously. But what the public didn't see was the environment behind those words, the private conversations, the unrecorded nights, the moments where a teenager was being molded by a man whose lifestyle was anything but child-friendly. It was a relationship that appeared beneficial on the surface, but, as we now know, mentorship in the entertainment industry can come with strings, and sometimes chains. Justin Bieber's early association with Diddy, once considered a badge of honor, is now being reconsidered as something far more troubling. As Justin Bieber's fame soared in the early 2000s and 10s, so did his access to the adult world of entertainment. A world that, for a boy barely out of middle school, was too much too soon. And while Scooter Braun and Usher were publicly credited for managing his rise, Diddy was the quiet shadow behind the scenes, hosting, guiding, and introducing Bieber to high-profile circles where control, image, and power ruled everything. There were parties where Justin would be seen at Diddy's side, barely old enough to drive, surrounded by industry elites twice his age. He appeared in exclusive clubs, Hollywood gatherings, and red carpet events that didn't exactly cater to teenagers. But Diddy, with his endless charm and open doors, made it happen. The power imbalance wasn't just about age, it was about access. Diddy could get Bieber into any room, introduce him to any star, and shape how the world viewed him. In turn, Bieber was expected to smile, show loyalty, and absorb the rules of this darker side of stardom. Behind the scenes, it wasn't uncommon for Bieber to be pulled into mentorship situations that felt more like dominance than guidance. People close to Bieber would later say that he was constantly overwhelmed, dealing with pressure from all sides. And while Diddy's influence helped his career, it also exposed him to the worst aspects of the industry: fame addiction, manipulation, and blurred moral lines. The psychological toll of those years began showing quickly. Bieber's behavior became erratic. He was arrested. He clashed with paparazzi. He spiraled. In retrospect, it's not surprising. Being 15 and told you're a global icon while being handed a drink at a party hosted by Diddy is not normal. It's dangerous. The entertainment world failed Bieber by treating him like an adult before he had a chance to become one. Diddy was never accused of harming Bieber directly, but the mentorship he offered placed Bieber in environments that no child should be in. That's a form of damage with lasting effects. And then there's the silence. Even as other young artists began to speak out about abusive power dynamics, Bieber stayed quiet. He didn't call Diddy out. He didn't push back until day 5 of the trial. That's when the quiet shadow of mentorship finally became a spotlight of regret. The internet never forgets. And when the Diddy scandal exploded into headlines, social media did what it does best. It started digging. What they found was a clip that had mostly gone unnoticed for years. A video featuring a young Justin Bieber and Diddy, laughing, smiling. On the surface, a harmless moment between a superstar and his protégé. But when viewed now, after the allegations, that moment turned chilling. In the clip, Diddy grins as he says, "I don't have legal guardianship of him, but for the next 48 hours, he's with me." He pats Bieber on the back. Bieber, awkwardly smiling, nods. At the time, it came off as just another quirky Diddy soundbite. Now, it reads like a red flag that was ignored. The clip is only a few minutes long, but what's unsettling is the tone. Diddy speaks with ownership. Bieber looks out of place. The audience laughed when it was aired years ago. Now those same laughs sound hollow. The video spread like wildfire across Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit. Commenters noted how uncomfortable Bieber seemed. Others expressed disbelief that no one raised concerns when it first aired. Context matters. And in the context of current sex trafficking allegations, videos like these take on a whole new meaning. What once seemed like celebrity mentorship now looks like a power imbalance being celebrated on national television. Sources close to Bieber say that seeing the video resurface was devastating for him, that it brought back moments he had buried, that it forced him to ask whether his gut feelings back then were right, and whether he was just too young and too afraid to speak up. The video's resurgence made it impossible for Bieber to remain silent. He began drafting a statement, quietly, carefully. It wasn't just about Cassie anymore. It was about the image he once had of a man who shaped his life, and the painful truth that the man he once looked up to may have never deserved that trust. And when Bieber finally posted, the world and Diddy was watching. By his mid-20s, Justin Bieber had lived through the rise, the crash, and the slow rebuild that few child stars survive. The boy once mentored by moguls like Diddy was no longer the wide-eyed kid on red carpets. He had become a man, and more importantly, a man who was learning how deeply his past had shaped him. Between 2014 and 2016, Bieber's life became defined by public breakdowns, vandalism charges, arrests, aggressive paparazzi confrontations, and cancelled appearances. The pressure cooker had exploded. In several interviews years later, Bieber admitted that fame had nearly killed him. "I would have been dead by now if I kept going," he told Zane Lowe. His voice was calm, his eyes weren't. But the turning point didn't come from music. It came from marriage. In 2018, Justin married model Hailey Baldwin. It wasn't just a relationship, it was a rebirth. Through Hailey and his growing Christian faith, Bieber began to strip away the layers of trauma and manipulation from his teen years. He got off drugs. He started therapy. He began to speak, carefully, and never in detail, about how people in the industry had used him when he was vulnerable. Though he didn't mention Diddy by name, the subtext was there. "People told me they loved me, then turned their back on me in a second," he said. He described being 15, surrounded by adults who saw him as an opportunity, not a human being. He started distancing himself from old industry ties. No more clubs, no more late-night appearances. His music grew more introspective. Songs like Lonely and Ghost hinted at emotional scars that fans could feel but couldn't name. Slowly, he reclaimed his identity. And yet, some ties remained. In 2023, Bieber collaborated on Diddy's Love album, Off the Grid. To the public, it seemed like a full-circle moment, a mentor and his former protege creating again. But insiders now say Bieber regretted the collaboration almost immediately. Sources close to him claim he wasn't aware of the severity of the allegations Diddy was facing when he agreed to participate. When the lawsuits hit and the raids began, Bieber reportedly went silent. "He shut down," said one associate. "He was angry, hurt, and confused. He didn't know what to believe." That's what made Day 5 so shocking. Because for years, Bieber had stayed quiet. He had kept his distance. But on that morning, minutes before court began, he finally broke that silence. And it changed everything. At exactly 8:12 a.m. on Day 5 of the trial, Justin Bieber posted a message to his 270 million followers that would change the tone of the entire court proceeding. It was only a few sentences long, paired with a black and white photo of him and Cassie from a music event years earlier. But the caption? It cut through the noise like a blade. "Cassie, I see you. I remember what I saw, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." Within minutes, it was everywhere. News outlets reposted it. Fans flooded the comments. Celebrities reacted, some with silence, some with support. But inside that courtroom, the impact was instant. Diddy, who had walked in with his usual posture of practiced calm, reportedly had his phone pulled from his hand by one of his lawyers after refreshing Instagram multiple times. But it was too late. He'd seen it, and his face said it all. In the post, Bieber went further. He described witnessing Diddy grab Cassie's arm too hard at a 2015 after-party. He said he remembered how Diddy would interrupt Cassie during interviews, answer questions for her, and monitor who she spoke to. Bieber wrote that he had always felt something was off, but that he had been too young, too confused, and too scared to say anything. He wrote, "There were moments when I thought, is this normal? But I was just a kid too. I thought this was how the industry worked." The post ended with a devastating line. "If I had spoken up sooner, maybe she wouldn't have felt so alone." The courtroom staff scrambled to manage the fallout. One legal assistant printed out the post and ran it to the prosecution team. The judge hadn't even entered the room yet when the whispers began. One juror requested water. A courtroom reporter sprinted to call their editor. Lawyers on both sides began whispering behind folders, their eyes wide. But the damage was already done. Bieber's words had done what no prosecutor's cross-examination could. They introduced an outside, credible witness. An A-lister who was once inside Diddy's world and was now publicly affirming Cassie's claims. Security began adjusting positions around Diddy's table. A guard moved closer. The courtroom's atmosphere went from tense to electric. Something was coming. Diddy sat motionless at first, his leg bouncing, his hand gripping the table edge. As the prosecution prepped to bring Cassie back to the stand, Diddy's lawyer tried to redirect his attention, handed him a notepad, pointed to exhibits. None of it worked. He'd already seen the post, and something inside him had shifted. Observers said his breathing became visibly heavier. He ran his hand through his hair, loosened his tie, whispered to his lawyer. Then, without warning, his hand slammed down on the table, knocking over a water glass. It shattered. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge immediately banged her gavel. "Mr. Combs, control yourself," she warned. But Diddy stood up. "You know this is all lies," he shouted, pointing at Cassie. "You know damn well that's not what happened. And him?" he said, gesturing at the evidence screen. "After everything I did for him?" Security moved in. His lawyer physically tried to pull him back down. Diddy shoved him away. One of the guards unclipped something on his belt. The judge stood up herself. "Remove the jury," she ordered. Cassie never flinched. As the jury was escorted out, Diddy kept yelling, "You're making this up. Loyalty means nothing anymore." And then, the words that froze the room. "I'll make sure he never works in this town again. Neither of them will." He was talking about Bieber, out loud, in court, in front of reporters. That moment shattered everything. Diddy had just threatened a global superstar in open court. His lawyer put his head in his hands. The prosecutor stared at him like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. And the judge wasn't done. She stood behind the bench and delivered the coldest line of the day. "Mr. Combs, you don't control what happens in this courtroom. One more outburst, and I will have you removed and held in contempt." Security didn't leave his side after that. One guard stationed directly behind him, another posted at the door. Diddy didn't speak again, but he didn't need to, because the image he had spent decades building, mogul, mentor, man in charge, had crumbled in real time. And for the first time, the jury wasn't just looking at a powerful figure being accused. They were looking at a man unraveling in front of them. When the courtroom finally settled after Diddy's outburst, and the jury returned to their seats, the prosecution didn't waste time. They brought Cassie Ventura back to the stand, calm and composed, as if the chaos minutes earlier hadn't even happened. But what she said next would be even more devastating than Diddy's meltdown, because it connected every piece of the puzzle, including Justin Bieber. Cassie took a deep breath and said, "I know people are shocked by what Justin posted, but I wasn't." The courtroom leaned in. She confirmed that during the years she was with Diddy, Bieber was often around. "We were both young. He was like a little brother to the industry. Diddy liked to show him off, bring him to events, teach him things." When asked if Bieber ever saw anything unusual, Cassie didn't hesitate. He saw more than he realized, and more than he was ready to process. Cassie explained that Diddy kept a list of men she wasn't allowed to talk to unless Diddy was present. Justin Bieber was on that list. He'd say, "Don't smile too long, don't talk unless I'm nearby." And if I did, there would be consequences later. The prosecution then introduced text messages between Cassie and Bieber from 2017, years before any lawsuits. They were simple, short exchanges, but chilling in retrospect. Cassie: "I don't know what to do anymore. He monitors everything." Bieber: "That's not normal. You need to talk to someone. This isn't okay." The jurors visibly shifted. Some looked stunned. One woman wiped tears from under her glasses. The messages not only supported Cassie's claims, they proved she had confided in someone years ago. This wasn't a last-minute fabrication. This wasn't motivated by a civil payout. It was a cry for help. When asked why she didn't bring those messages forward earlier, Cassie answered simply, "Because he told me no one would believe me." And I believed him. As she continued, she described a specific moment at a music industry party. "I was talking with Justin by the buffet, laughing, harmless. When Diddy saw us, he pulled me aside and whispered, 'Even Justin knows what happens to people who cross me.'" That quote hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Cassie stared straight ahead as she repeated it. "That was the first time I was truly afraid for Justin. And for myself." The prosecution ended her testimony there, not with more evidence, but with silence. And that silence said everything. Bieber's post hadn't just gone viral. It had become evidence. By the afternoon of Day 5, the trial had become more than just Cassie versus Diddy. It had grown into something far bigger. News outlets were calling it the most significant celebrity courtroom case since the downfall of Harvey Weinstein. And the difference this time? The public wasn't waiting for a verdict. They were watching the unraveling in real time. As the jury processed Cassie's testimony and the new messages between her and Bieber, the media frenzy outside the courthouse exploded. TMZ, Variety, Rolling Stone, and CNN all ran headlines within minutes. Bieber testimony validates Cassie's claims. Text messages from 2017 shatter Diddy's defense. Diddy threatened Bieber in court? But it wasn't just reporters reacting. Behind the scenes, the music industry was starting to panic. Sources close to Justin Bieber said his phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Artists, producers, even executives were reaching out, some to thank him, others to warn him. One message allegedly read, "You just opened the floodgates." And they weren't wrong. Former assistants, backup dancers, label interns, people who had spent years under Diddy's empire began contacting Cassie's lawyers. Not all wanted to testify, but many were willing to submit sworn affidavits. The common thread? Fear, silence, and now, validation. Even other celebrities began inching toward the edge. Usher's old 2022 interview, where he said he'd never let his kids live with Diddy, resurfaced and went viral again. People were now putting together timelines, realizing how long the industry may have known, realizing that the silence had always been the loudest part. On social media, fans started calling out other artists who had collaborated with Diddy over the years. Some started issuing statements distancing themselves. Others deactivated comments. The pressure was building because Bieber had broken the unspoken rule, don't speak out, don't name names. Cassie's lawyers later revealed that several artists had already requested to speak with prosecutors off the record. Some had stories, some had recordings. All of them were scared. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution looked calm. But they weren't done yet. Because they were about to introduce something even more damning than texts. A video. As Day 5 reached its final hour, the prosecution asked the judge for permission to present a piece of visual evidence that had just been authenticated. The courtroom hushed. The judge nodded, and the lights dimmed slightly. What played on the screen wasn't long, just 40 seconds. It was security footage from 2018, inside the lobby of a high-end hotel in Los Angeles. Cassie could be seen talking to a male artist. Then, Diddy entered the frame. He didn't cause a scene, but he didn't have to. He walked straight over, placed a hand firmly around Cassie's waist, and whispered something in her ear. Her smile vanished. She nodded. He guided her away. It was subtle, chillingly subtle, but it perfectly matched the behavior she had described, and the control Bieber said he'd witnessed firsthand. When the lights came back up, Diddy wasn't staring at the judge. He was staring at the floor. As court adjourned for the day, reporters swarmed out of the building. And by nightfall, the damage had spread. Brands began pulling endorsements. Streaming platforms quietly reviewed whether to remove Diddy's past catalog. Behind closed doors, there were talks of dissolving business partnerships. And more people were coming forward. For Justin Bieber, the day didn't end in victory. It ended in exhaustion. A source close to him said, "He didn't do this to be a hero. He did it because he couldn't stay silent anymore." Bieber had gone through his own hell, and now he'd used his voice to help someone else walk through theirs. For Cassie, it was more than vindication. It was proof that her story mattered. That someone, especially someone the world once idolized, had seen it, believed it, and said something. And for Diddy, it was the beginning of the end. What happens next remains to be seen. But after Day 5, one thing was certain. The silence that protected the powerful for so long had finally been broken, and it might never return.